the Lord of the Blade. Got a dozen guildmates, always up for a late night raid. Though I wouldn't know them by a name or a face. We fight like brothers in a war with the dark elf race. In a dying age, I live in dungeons. Dungeons. Always here. I live in dungeons. Dungeons. Like a kid. Dungeons.
Alrighty. Good morning, everybody. This is NycosRPG, and I am Jonathan Albin. And today we're going to talk about what makes a game great. If you've ever had a game session and you've finished it up and everybody's on an exciting high and everybody's just thrilled with the way things went, there was some danger, there was some thrills, there were lots of laughs. The mechanic that we all seem to want to grasp is the means by which to make every game session that special. And that is the topic of our discussion today. We're going to talk about what makes something really stand out, and that standout element is something that has been termed significance. And the idea of significance really carries with it the gravitas, the idea of this was something special. So what does it take to make a game session special? I'm Jonathan Albin. This is NycosRPG Creative Differences, and today we're going to talk about specifically what is significance. What is it that makes a game session just smash? And I know I'm probably using the modern vernacular improperly, so I'm old, I use that excuse. But what is significance? And to analyze it, to try to break down what it is specifically that you can grab a hold of and chew on, you really have to do analysis. You have to actually look at what built up the game session, what went into it, what was different this session over a previous session. They just made it really connect. And as a game master who's been doing it for 50 years, it's both simpler and more difficult than you might expect. So we're going to be taking a look at the actual key points of significance. And in the meantime, I do want to mention that if you are a follower of this show and want to become a part of our community, you can join us at patreon.com. That will give you access to our Discord channel. And anyone who is a member of the Discord channel is officially a citizen of Nykos and therefore can immediately join with us via Discord, generally speaking. And if possible, I'll add you to the live stream and you can actually get on and have a conversation with me. As I've said several different times during this show and others like it, I much prefer a dialogue than a monologue, but we're not apparently there at this point. So I want to take some time and talk about what can make a session really work, because I have developed a means whereby nearly every one of my sessions we walk away going, wow, how did we accomplish that? That was amazing. And in the many years of doing this analysis, we've come up with some terms. So when we speak of that really impactful scene, we're talking about something that is significant to the story. But to talk about significance, we need to first understand what significance really is. And so the first thing I want to do is share with you the actual definition when we're talking about it from a analysis basis and that statistical basis. And yes, I'll leave it on the screen for a few seconds so that you could pause it and read it. But the really micro print there is in essence saying that statistical significance is any time the possibility of some agency other than randomness is affecting an outcome. that generally trickles down to something equal to or less than 5%. And I think that's important because in role-playing games, we all love the 5%. Now, some people don't really know it as that, but you do know it as the critical hit, the critical failure, that 1 in 20 chance of something really spectacular happening. So when we talk about critical hits, what we're really talking about are the differing positions that significance plays in role-play games. And if as anybody that has ever built a persona, a character for a role-play game, knows, the numbers are what makes the game really different, because you're utilizing mathematics to translate to activities in a seemingly real-time situation. You're actually trying to consider what would happen in that scene, and then the die rolls are how we achieve or accomplish the resolution of that point of conflict. And what makes for the really significant ones, the ones that really stand out, are that 1 in 20 chance. Either the stumbling, falling, dropping your weapon, horribleness of critical failure, or the split the enemy from shoulder to hip, and all of that goes into the concept of a critical success or a critical hit. But we're going to talk today about how these numbers apply in all of these different attributes. When you're building a persona, and I'm using the terms, the Nycos terms here: base, race, place, estates, stuff, skills, and roles. I'm utilizing that mechanism because it makes it easier to talk about. As I mentioned before, the acronym Nycos while it is a fantasy setting, it's also not your clumsy old system. And so I'm not trying to talk about the mechanics of Nycos. I'm just utilizing the terms to give familiarity, if you are a role player, to what I'm speaking of. So when I speak of the base, for example, I'm talking about what are traditionally known as the attributes of the persona: how fast it is, how strong it is, etc. Every person I know loves it when they get in the case of Dungeons and Dragons, an 18 in an attribute, because that 18 is the pinnacle. It's the statistical variance one step above, and is the optimal for that die roll. By having that little tiny edge at the top, you're able to get to those significant moments arguably more quickly. But I want to talk about that too, because I think what we're really realizing is that when we say that a scene is exciting and a scene is thrilling, it's when the ups and downs are truly significant. If every time you take a swing with your weapon, you connect, and you do sufficient damage to be lethal, it doesn't take very long to make a fight scene not significant, because every round's the same. So that's not significance. Having a high stat, therefore, is significant only in a world where the number of statistics that are in that bracket are relatively small. If you have a warrior in your adventuring party who has a exceedingly high strength, his role will become more significant, more interesting to the combat, because he will be the anchor upon which, he'll be the hinge upon which everything swings, the lever, I guess. The issue is that if everyone has a high value, if every character in an adventure group has superhero numbers, then it's really a superhero group. It's not a adventuring group. It's not the youth coming up out of high school and becoming an adventurer and going on the pathway of his life. Instead, it's a aggregate of moderately high numbers, in which case there's no variance, there's no thrill to it. And I've seen players who do the counter to that, which is they'll have no really good stats, and therefore they play off the comedy of always failing. But if you're always failing, then there's nothing significant about it. So the key is that we want there to be a swing between these. The same applies when you're looking at the species. If every species has advantages and therefore there is no significance to their species, then why play it? Other than, and this is interesting, other than playing a character for its normalcy, if everybody plays an absolutely normal character, then when the die rolls do go well, then that becomes the significant point. So where do you want the significance? Do you want it front loaded onto the attributes and the species of the persona that you're building, and therefore once it's been built, ta-da, done, it's now Superman, and therefore all of its die rolls are no longer surprising, therefore no longer significant? Or would you want there to be a range of these? I believe that's probably why when the personas were first created, they used the ranging system, so that when you rolled the particularly good roll, it would stand out compared to the others and be therefore the significant attribute. Same with the species. If everybody plays, if all players play the same species, then there's nothing that stands out by their species. So mix it up so that each one has a bit of its own level of significance. Same's true with the class or persona. In the world of Nikos, there is no class mechanism, although there are ways to sculpt yourself into a role if you so choose in a much more narrow way. But if everyone is playing uniformly across all the number spectrums, then a particularly good die roll will make a difference. All I'm saying is that the mechanism for what makes the game significant can vary. And so we can't just say, well, always run a unique persona and that will make your session significant. So there's something beyond just these numbers that matter. So we have to therefore look at it slightly differently. So let's go back and look at something else. When we say something is statistically significant, we say it has a probability of about 5%. Therefore, the top 20, that top 1 out of 20, or so a 20 out of 20 for a natural 20, or a critical failure of 1 is itself interesting, but there's actually more to be said about it. And that is, from a practical standpoint, is when something has influence in a given situation or condition. And this could be for and by the character, the director, or the story itself. If there is something significant about what is going on in the game, that interesting, that mind worm that makes you want to know more, can be significant. But there's a possibility, of course, that you will take this to the logical extreme and make everything important. And that's kind of like putting a siren on a snail. If you create interest by having something be important, but you make everything important, you've succeeded in making nothing important. So I'm going to give you an example of that. When we talk about significance in a game, what makes a game really pop, the first thing you say is, well, what is going to make the game pop is the fantasy world. What setting are you in? And this is a map of the world of Nikos, with most of the known cities and villages and towns marked on the map. And therefore, just that alone can make a place significant. If you look at this map, you go, okay, what place looks unique? What place looks like a place I'd want to adventure? Maybe it's the giant lake of Maria, which is arguably the largest body of liquid in the whole world on the surface. It's, that's significant. Maybe it's the Silverblade Mountains, because they're the only mountains in all of Yalem. Each of these ways makes that seem significant. But when you have this much of a world to cover and that many things to do, they're all interesting and they're all significant. But let's go one step further. Let's say, okay, I want to look at just the areas on the surface of Nykos that are unique enough to be points of interest. Well, now we post a bunch of those on the map, and you say, wow, that's a lot. Well, there's not even 20 of them, so any one of them could be significant. And maybe that's what you're looking for, is a place for the adventures to occur that is, intriguing or interesting. But in the case of a full-blown world, there are a lot of things, a lot of places that could be. So let's look at this from a different angle. Let's say, well, okay, that's all well and good, but points of interest, that's not the way I tell my stories. I tell my stories by the positioning or the interests of my players. So I want to look at what they're looking at. And so you set for them an objective. And in the case of the World of Nykos, I go, well, there are 6 units of let's go with this one first. There are dozens of countries. Let's decide that we're going to do a travelogue. We're going to visit all of the major cities of Nykos. Well, okay, again, major cities. There's a bunch of those. So that could be any one of those would be a significant place, given all of them that are possible. That's an area of significance. Or what if instead you were looking at locations of power? And we're talking about the ancient cities of power that the players were looking for a while. This is a bit of an Easter egg, so I'm sure that some players will want to pause on this map and scratch down notes on where these cities of power are. They have gotten the list of their names, but now they've got a map with some locations on it. There's only 6 of them, but they're significant. These, especially if you're talking about a long-term campaign. If this was a 6-year campaign, you could spend literally a year adventuring in each one of these, and that would be significant because it's obviously called a city of power for some reason. What does that mean? And then you say, well, no, I'm going to actually give them the objective of destroying a bunch of ziggurats, positions of power, locations of archaeological significance. So now you put them on the map. But then if you start putting these on together and showing all the things that you could do in the world of Nykos, and pretty soon that one in particular is all the locations of the priest king power sources, or put the capitals back on it. So you've got all these different locations. It becomes really insignificant. There's so much going on that you really can't say that any given one of these is a something to pursue. And that's where the story matters. It isn't the location you've built. It isn't the capitals that you've put out or the artifacts that you've left laying around. It's not even the location of the villains or their nodes of power. It really comes down to what the players want to do. And so when they choose one, that becomes the significant point. And therefore, culmination of that adventure is going to make it significant. Now, with all those different points I put out, obviously the purpose for that is that every player that comes to the game brings their own reasons to play, and therefore by giving them a panoply of possibilities, each player might trigger on a different one of these. What I have found really dynamically exciting is that when that happens, when you have multiple players chasing multiple objectives in a world that allows for it, every session can be exciting because it can be scratching an itch for one of the players or more. And what I find particularly dynamic is when that happens, the players band together. They gain energy from the other players accomplishing their objectives. So by giving them that broader spectrum of possibilities, but only letting allowing the players to choose which one they want to go to, that makes a difference. So now we're going to talk about how you can make that happen every session. And the first way to do that is to get to my checklist here. And that is to think about what is really significant in your game. And to some people, the numbers matter. It really does matter to them what the numbers are on their persona sheet. I have a young lady who participates in my games all the time. I love her to death, but man, she focuses on whether her numbers are advancing. If there is a hint of stagnation or a hint of the inability to advance, it bothers her. And so the ways to keep the numbers rackets going for those people that play them is to make sure that combat is dangerous. Make sure there are risks involved, that the players do not know whether they're going to survive every encounter or not. And in the NycosRPG mechanism, the easiest way to do that is cause them to make checks against their base attributes often enough that there's a chance that they'll miss a die roll or two. Because when you allow characters' abilities to advance, especially in games like Dungeons and Dragons, when you have got a hit point pool that's in the double digits or even triple digits, and you have an armor value that's in the double digits, and it makes it very difficult to actually harm them, there's no threat. And if there's no threat, there's no reward. And if there's no reward, the situation's not significant. It's not fun. Whereas if there's always the chance they could get into trouble with their numbers, they're going to be feeling it more. They're going to be engaged in it more. Also, let the actions that they take have real in-game consequences. This also helps to support the suppression, if you will, of the YOLO, the Leroy Jenkins of the game, because if they know that what they're doing in-game can have in-story, in-game consequences, they won't risk it without realizing the benefit. Now, you also want to make sure that you can reward non-lethal ways, because in many cases, the very concept of lethality has overshadowed your game sessions, and so the players are just war weary. If every session somebody is worried about being put down because of hit points lost, maybe find ways to make the conflicts not about that, and therefore take some of that pressure off, and therefore make what happens in a battle more significant, because it may not go the way the players want, and by doing that, you're providing those issues of ambiguity that are so important to making a scene meaningful. The next thing to talk about beyond the numbers is how much does a given player influence the session. And if you have one really dynamic player, he or she is really just great at bringing the story forward and everything, you tend to want to promote that person's ideas and follow it, because that's the part that feels, exciting to you. But if you're not getting interaction from all of your players, then your high points will never be as high as they could be, because perhaps somebody who's not in a primary role is the one who lands the fatal blow. One of the ways to fix this and to make this more likely is to make sure that you regiment the time that a player has to talk. For a good number of sessions, when I was younger, I would carry with me a sand glass. It was I think it was 10 or 12 minute sand glass. And I had that on the table because I wanted to make sure that each player at the table got a fair amount of time to be the one in the hot seat, the person who was answering the questions and resolving things. Now, some groups that doesn't work. You have to have somebody really step forward for the wallflowers, so to speak, and I get that. But by regimenting the amount of time that a player's action takes during the session, you're giving a more equitable feel, and therefore, when a player does something dynamic and has to take some extra time, it becomes significant to the group. They then turn and pay their attention and focus on it. Also, the easier way to handle this is to make sure that you get an idea of the full table's actions per time phase. One of the things that's always bugged me, and this is both as a player and as a game master, were those situations where literally the players have to wait their turn for the ability to swing, and if they've got a lower initiative for some reason and they therefore always are acting late in the session, then they're playing cleanup. Somebody else gets to do all the initial damage to monsters. They're able to deal the critical, death blow wound and literally deprive the later player of action. So it's far better to have the full table actions described, and that way you can isolate, okay, this is the actions against this guy, so both you guys roll. Therefore, it gets that simultaneity going, but it also allows for the die rolls to differentiate rather than the order of operation. This is also why I highly recommend individual initiative and re-rolling turn over turn to allow for a churn of actors. If you're going to go action by action, definitely use some kind of rolling mechanism, but also ensure that if the group has an agenda, that the group knows about it, and so before each combat sequence, confirm the group's decisions. Are we here to fight the monsters to the death? Are we here to fight the monsters until we make them run away? Are we fighting until the monsters have us on the ropes? And by having an idea of what the group's decision is, it gives more room for there to have been a uniformizing idea that everybody was holding to, and yet when that statistical variance, that 1 in 20, then all of a sudden now it's exciting again because it's out of the routine. Final recommendation, and this is always the case, I highly recommend the idea of using debriefing feedback. When you are playing a role-play game, I don't care where you are or who the storyteller is, you're going to want to have some time to give some feedback. Game masters get better only when they get a chance to see where they might have made a mistake or whatever. So by utilizing these methodologies, you make the significant more recognizable and can focus on it, and let the other players appreciate it as well. The last thing to mention is that maybe your style has become stagnant. If you've been having a group of 6 to 10 players on a regular basis and all of a sudden they're dropping down to 4 or 3, there may be something to the fact that your games are feeling too much the same week over week. So consider your story style. Is it always run through the little guys, then go after the boss? Or maybe you're always allowing the players to reboot before the big fight, and so therefore the players are missing a week in order to have those moments of the big fight because it's the only part they like. The idea here is that you need to get player input from your groups in advance of planning your next session, because that way you get an idea of what they're looking for, and keep notes on what you've been doing, because quite often the story you're telling will fall into a routine pattern because it feels good to you, but your players may find it discomforting and want to do something different. So make sure you keep aware of that, because style stagnation is another way that you can mess up your play groups. So therefore, pick up some new styles, try some new things, experiment, find out what might be interesting, and explore that, because your players they're gonna give you feedback, but they really can't give you feedback if you haven't given them something to bounce against. All in all, I would say that this entire show has been about the fact that to make your games exciting, there needs to be something different each time. There's got to be something that draws attention. Whether it's we had a very fun session yesterday because we got going on an individual name of a persona, and it got sillier and sillier until we were all laughing like crazy. Now, was it profitable for the story? No. Did it take some time away from the adventuring that we could have used for other reasons? Sure. But it made a memorable episode, session of play, because we will remember that conversation long after it's over. And that's really what this is all about. We want players to be engaged and become a part. And really for that, they need to be able to have their moment in the sun, their moment to shine, their capability of being, the center of attention. And that can be for good or ill. So just realize that the balance of power in a game session, to make it really pop each session, is some level of significance. If their characters are built so they're maximized, you can't do it with the numbers. So don't try to make it a significant thing about their stats. Make it something about their interactions. If they're built so that they are a cohesive unit and can't be rattled or whatever, then don't build towards that, because that's also going to be the more boring part. We have to play into the unique portions, and that's what makes a game truly significant. If you like what you're seeing, this is NycosRPG. I'd love to have you follow us here on Twitch, and if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. And one more important thing, please share this video if you enjoyed it with other people. This is a new channel, and I'm trying to build out the awareness of what tools I can provide. NycosRPG is going to be a really useful toolbox for your games, regardless of what style and campaign setting you play under. More information on that is available at NycosRPG.com. And also, if you want to be a part of our community, become a player in the games in the world of Nykos, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Nykos. And we will see you in the next episode. This has been Jonathan Albin, and this has been Creative Difference.